Bueno,
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. And with this, before we begin, we are going to again begin our online broadcasting, virtual broadcasting. And in addition to having you guys personally here, we're also broadcasting this live to those who could not come to Panama. Um, so, again, welcome to those of you that are attending virtually. And now we're going to continue that now that we have opened our virtual session. And again, this is something that we learned through the COVID. Before COVID, we did not broadcast these transmissions, but thanks to COVID, we learned many things about technology. So now we have the capacity of expanding the reach of our conferences and programs. And in addition to those who are connected online, I would also like to let you know that with us for this third version, we have personally approximately 80 participants representing 59 companies from 13 countries in the region, all the way from Mexico to Chile. We even have countries from the Caribbean, including Jamaica and the Dominican Republic online. We have other people participating. They're going to access this information online, virtually. And yeah, from other Latin American countries as well. And through the conferences, you and them are going to have the opportunity to listen to 19 different speakers. Most of them come from the United States. For today's agenda focuses on corn. Those of you that are here with us today, you received the event agenda. We're going to have it on the screen in just a second. This is a brief summary of what we plan to do today. We're going to begin with an analysis of supply and demand, corn supply and demand. As many of you do know, this is basically the foundation for animal feed. After that presentation, we're going to continue with the quality report for the harvest, American corn harvest 2022-2023. This is what we call the new harvest, and this is the 12th report that is being produced by the U.S. Grains Council regarding the harvest, the corn harvest. And the idea is to give you, grain users, first person perspective as to the quality of the harvest. And that is going to be our second presentation today. Then we're going to have the opportunity of interacting with four corn producers from the United States, from Iowa, Ohio, Kansas, and Kentucky. And they're going to tell us about their experience, their production experience during this last season. And they're going to tell us about their use of biotechnology, their expectations with regards to production, and also about the effects of the Russia Ukraine effects with regards to the fertilizers that are used to produce corn. These are the most frequent questions that we hear when we visit our countries. And again, these are frequent questions from buyers and from nutritionists. So we're going to take advantage of that panel with producers to understand how they have been affected by these situations or benefited by these situations. In addition, any other questions that you might have, the idea is that the panel is going to be open to questions eventually, and you are invited to participate actively. Then we're going to present the most recent efforts that we have undertaken to improve knowledge with regards to sustainable corn production in the United States. After that, we're going to have a brief break, and then we're going to conclude the academic section with a presentation about mycotoxins. Mycotoxin is also a very frequent is a topic about which we receive many questions every time we present this report. And again, mycotoxins, as I just said, is a topic that you guys always want to learn more about. So we have brought a speaker that is going to speak to us about mycotoxins from a quality control perspective. For those of you who are present in this room today, we're going to conclude today's program with a welcoming reception. We will give you more details further on, and then tomorrow we're going to speak about other grains and other products that are represented by the U.S. Grains Council. We're going to focus mostly on the very recent studies with regards to the use of these grains on different species. So we'll go deeper into those topics tomorrow. But again, this is basically what we have on the agenda. Additional information before we continue with the presentations, and I promise I'm about to finish. Yes, the break, and we're going to have a snack at approximately 4:30 outside this room. We have tables. We also have a coffee table in the back of this room. Throughout the meetings, you guys can have coffee, water, and tea. Bathrooms are outside this room. Just walk towards the stairs, make a left, and eventually you're going to make a right. You will see the signs for the bathroom somewhere in the middle of the hallway. As we mentioned before, we also have simultaneous translation throughout the event, simultaneous interpretation throughout the event. And those of you who are here, you have your little radios in front of you. Those of you who are listening to us online, Zoom has an option for simultaneous interpretation. You simply click on the glove icon and select the language that you want to listen in. In addition, all the presentations today and tomorrow are going to be available after next week. Are going to be available after next week. To those of you who respond event survey that we will be handing out tomorrow. So yes, survey translates into having access to this presentation. Again, the survey is quite important for us because this survey allows us to evaluate what we did right and what we didn't do right during the event, and also what you guys would like to see in future events, and also with the idea of having better presentations. I would like to ask you again to place your cell phones on silent mode or airplane mode. Yes, we are working. We continue receiving emails, WhatsApp, and calls, and so on. So if you need to take a phone call, please step out of the room so we do not interrupt the other participants. Okay? So now we're going to begin with our academic agenda, and for this, I'm going to invite to the podium Juan Antonio Hinojosa. Juan Antonio Hinojosa is going to speak about the supply and demand situation of corn. He's a sole technician of the Superior Center of the Centro Superior Stores in Monterrey, Mexico. He began working with AgroAcemex, a federal company that is responsible for agricultural insurance in Mexico. He worked there for 4 months, and he was responsible for agricultural insurance beginning in the 1990s. In 1995, he was invited by the Bank of Rural Credit in Mexico to participate as an advisor to the general management. 1996, he was promoted as sub-manager in the unit of planning and budgeting of that same bank, and he performed in that position until 1999. Then he was invited to work as a broker for StoneX in Kansas City, in the United States, and he was working with companies in Mexico, Central America, and Colombia, and he worked with different derivative instruments for handling risk, especially in the markets of corn, wheat, and for different livestock species. In 1993, he was invited by the Mexican market to work in the Board of Agriculture to create the basis of the agriculture per contract in that contract. And after that, he became a senior advisor for RIC administration in the Latin American office of StoneX in Kansas City. After 2020, StoneX expanded operations and reinforced its operations, and Juan Antonio was relocated to Miami, where he continues working as vice president and senior consultant with regards to risk administration. He develops and creates risk administration programs for producers, buyers, and final consumers. Is a very familiar face to many of us, and with this, Juan, you're welcome, and please come up to the podium.
Gracias. Gracias. Gracias, María. Gracias. Buenas tardes. Gracias. Un honor estar aquí.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's quite an honor to be with you, and I'm responsible for the first presentation, basically to let you know what's happening in the market today. We make decisions based on prior decisions. At least that's what we used to do. Not the case anymore. So without any further preamble, I'm going to jump into my presentation. Okay, basically what this says is that I'm not responsible for anything that I say. Okay, what's new? What's new? Well, 2023 opened its doors with the following prices reached the highest historical prices in 2022, and this is information from the FAO. So again, the food reached its highest prices in history last year, and according to this chart, these indexes that we have in front of us, 143 143.7 points, 14.3 above 2021, and actually this is, as I said before, the highest level, the highest price ever reached. So again, in 2022, four out of the five food sub-indexes, meaning cereal, meats, dairy products, and oils, vegetable oils, again reached the highest historical prices. Sugar is the fifth one, and sugar reached its highest price in the last 10 years. So this was our happy new year this year. So what's new? Basically, the most recent information with regards to supply and demand that comes from the Agricultural Department of the United States indicates the following. It indicates that globally for the 22-23 cycle, it's 1,155 million tons of corn versus 1 million, 1,214 million. Most importantly, final stock 296 million tons versus 306 million tons. Again, less production, less stock, and this is globally. If we were to look into as to who is producing, well, the first producer is the United States. 30% of the global production comes from the United States. Corn production, that is, whatever happens in the United States is going to affect us directly. I mean, we speak about Brazil frequently, about Argentina frequently, but if we look at the production of these two countries produce 50% of what the United States produces. But one very interesting point is not only production, but exports. Who is offering grains in the market and who is impacting the prices? And if we check who is in the market, still the United States is the first exporter of corn in the world with 27%. However, if we look at Brazil under this table, Brazil and Argentina, again, their weight is more significant. It is important to see how Brazil is only 1 percentage point below the United States for this new 2022-2023 cycle. And again, I think that's quite interesting. I think that's quite important. And I think this is going to have an impact on prices when the newest or the most recent harvest in Brazil hits the market. If we look at the supply and demand table, again, we see additional surprises. The first surprise is that the surface that is being cropped, again, here we can see all the months, and they have changed this, and basically 79.2 million acres versus 88.6. So basically, what this indicates is that the surface that is being planted in the United States with regards to corn is less, but there's also more yield, one extra bushel per acre. But this is less than 300. This is 348 million tons of corn versus 353, which was calculated versus 382, which was the results of the last cycle. With regards to fodder usage, 134 million versus 5.3 billions. Basically, this indicates that there's less consumption. Why do you think there's less consumption? Less livestock consumption. Why would someone stop consuming corn for livestock use as well? Basically, the answer is price. Yes, price. Exports, right here, another important point. Exports also were reduced from 52.7 or 6.75 to 1,000. Again, someone is taking this market from the United States, and that someone is is Brazil. We're going to speak a lot about Brazil during my presentation today. Final inventories. 1,242 versus 1,547. Again, less inventories in terms of corn. It's also a surprise. Everybody was thinking that we were going to have additional stock, but that is not the case. The market, as we know, does not like surprises. Markets do not like surprises, and these were definitely surprises for all of us. But it's not changing. And this is a very nice pointer. So again, payment to producers is really not changing. This figure doesn't really change with regards to payment to producers, and regardless, there are changes in the supply and demand table. Yes, many changes. Another report that was published in January refers to the stock or the inventories on December 1st, and there are two major differences between these two reports. But I just mentioned inventories, right? Well, this report, we're looking at estimates. These are projections as to how the cycle was expected to close. What we have in this table now is the reality. How much real grain we had in our inventories on December 1st. And yes, another big surprise here. We have that as of December 1st, 2022, the inventories were 10.81 billion bushels. Corn inventories, and the expectation of the market was 11.15, and this is way below December 1st, 2021. So we underestimated demand. Again, two sectors, maybe the livestock sector, but I think the ethanol industry also had a big impact here. So, in other words, there's less grains than what the market expected. If we look at the supply of corn throughout the United States, we would see that the bases are the most expensive bases in the last 20 years. So we saw that the market was stable, but the bases were different. And what's happening is that we have less grain, and the bases indicate that reality with regards to supply and demand. And again, this makes the situation a little bit clearer. What happened is that we consume more, so we have less grains available. With regards to demand, I'm going to focus on two things: livestock use and uses for ethanol production. This table that we have here is a comparison of corn prices versus wheat, basically, in important livestock areas in the United States. And again, this is surprising to many of us, and we can see here that wheat is actually less expensive than corn. I'm not speaking about any type of wheat. I'm speaking about soft wheat. I'm speaking about hard wheat that can be turned into bread, winter wheat that is. And again, it's cheaper, not as expensive. Southeast Kansas, again, the panhandle of Texas, in the North Carolinas, and Colorado as well. So, excuse me, not in Colorado, but this has to indicate something. And again, all these things add to the supply and demand situation for this first semester. Everybody focuses on Brazil exports and taking share with regards to the U.S. exports, but what's happening is that this is also more expensive. Again, corn is more expensive than wheat. With regards to corn consumption for ethanol, 1/3 of everything that is produced in the United States is used for ethanol purposes. Political issue, whatever it is, this is what is being used for. And we have that last week 943,000 daily barrels of ethanol production, inventories of 23 million. However, if we look at the general balance between production, between supply and demand, we would need to be producing more than 1 million barrels per day, and we're not doing that. Well, we have similar levels to what we had at the end of 2021. Okay. So yes, is the ethanol industry going to remain? Yes. If the oil barrels remain at $80, $90, ethanol is going to remain present. Margins perhaps are not going to be as good, but they're going to remain, and they're going to continue consuming, and this is going to impact our basis with regards to operations in the U.S. Sales, exports. This dotted yellow line is what we exported last year. The brown dotted line is what the USDA projects to export this year, and the blue bars is what was really exported. And as you can see, since the commercial cycle began, we have not been able to reach the USDA projections, not even 47% of what was projected. Now, who are the main buyers here? Basically, Mexico. Yes, I love Mexico. I'm from Mexico. Mexico remains as the first buyer of U.S. corn. NGOs and so on. Well, basically, Mexico consumes and exports 67 million tons this year. China is the second one. Big difference between these two countries. If we look into the specific details, as of January 5th, we can see that Mexico had bought 10.9 million tons versus 12.3 of last year. But Mexico is exporting from other countries as well, from Brazil, from South Africa as well. And why? Because corn is expensive. Corn has gotten more expensive, but something that is very important, China 3.9 million tons versus 12.4, which they bought last year, which they exported last year. In Latin America as well, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Colombia, again, very similar figures. El Salvador, very similar figures, and they're all there. And in these two countries, a tremendous potential of U.S. exports are taken. Okay, this is the zone that produces corn in the United States. Perhaps you have heard that there have been droughts in the U.S. or that it is raining a lot in the U.S., but where? There are four main states: Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, and Minnesota. They produce close to 60% of what's produced in the United States. Only four states. Illinois produces 27 million tons, while Illinois produces double, close to 50 million tons. So whatever happens in these states is going to impact us. And what is the situation in those states? This is the map. This is the precipitation forecast for January. Right now, it's not raining in the corn belt. And yes, corn has been harvested, but this area is having more precipitations than what was expected. And if we look at January, February, and March, the forecast for those 3 months, we continue seeing very good projections for the east part of the United States. And this is quite important because this is the area where we capture all the movement of the Mississippi River with regards to corn exports. And last year we had many problems with the Mississippi River due to the drought. With this year's snow, the flow of grain is going to be more important in that area, and of course this is going to have an impact. And why? Because when we heard about this Ukraine situation, everybody relied on the Americas for their grains, and the United States was having logistical problems, railway problems, and problems with the Mississippi River, and this is important. And this basically indicates that there's going to be more grain available next year to sell and to export to whoever wants it.
There's a very important shift. And it's according to the climate, we have lived for a long time the effect of La Niña. The analysis that we received on climate change have shown us an effect of Niña towards Niño in 2023. It's possible that the La Niña is going to weaken for the following months. This is going to favor us. Or let's say a south in oxidation El Niño in the first trimester of 2023. So many people think that this can promote not only at the end of March, but maybe at the end of February. And what would that affect me? Several things. First of all, it can favor in rainfall, in corn, soybean, in Argentina, for example. For me, this rainfall is going to help, but they're going to arrive late. But they will gonna benefit the center part of the United States for sorghum, for example. On the meantime, when we end the La Niña, definitely it's going to have an impact on price, because these are not past markets. These are markets towards the future. What I do think I know is going to impact in prices furthermore or in the future. Well, who else produces? Who is present? We have Brazil, Argentina, Ukraine, China. How are they? First of all, Brazil. Let's talk about Brazil. The increase in production of Brazil is very important. 125 million tons for this cycle 22-23, when last year was 116, only 187 past year. This is incredible. The production of Brazil is very strong. Exports, 47 million tons versus 45 million last year, with 27 the previous year. So Brazil is a very important player, very strong one. Let's talk about Argentina. 52 million tons against 55 on the previous months, 49 on the previous year. There's a slight reduction, 3 million. These are official numbers. We're going to see what the local numbers say. This is official. Exports, 38 million against 35.5 million on the previous year. According to this, South America is going to be very active. It's producing, it's going to be present in the market. What happens with Ukraine? It has 27 million tons of production. Produces more than Mexico. And it's a country in war, unfortunately. Ukraine against 42.1 in the previous year. Exports, 20.5 million against 27 of past year. It's going to be active. It's going to be exporting. China, second producer of corn in the world, 277 million, increased their production compared to the previous month, and 5 more millions than the previous year. But most importantly, it's their imports. And for this 22-23 cycle, the imports of corn is going to be 18 million tons, when last year were around 21.9 million. And the previous year were in 29.5 million. All of us who focus on the fact that China was going to import the quantity of grain without having to know when, it's the price. China is not importing corn. It has an internal project of growing in 2030, whatever. These are centralized decisions. I don't know. But officially, they're saying they're going to import every year less and less. Mexico, 17 million tons for this year against a lower compared to last year, and the European Union. Something interesting about the European Union, as you know, they had a very bad year. It had a huge drought in that part of the world. The production of corn, 54.2 against 71 compared to last year. But the most important thing is not the low of production, but their imports are stable. 21.5 against 19. So it's not responding to low production. What's happening in Europe then? Substitution? Replacement? With what? But definitely corn, they're going to try to keep it very stable. Very well. I'm going to focus in Argentina, Brazil, and Ukraine. What happens with Argentina? This is the area of production in Argentina. This is an image taking last week. Rainfall. But sporadic rainfall. They are in the process of pollination today. And the prognosis for January, February, and March is dry. Last week, Argentina had planted 83% already. Below, okay, but they were planted. The problem is not the quantity or advancement of that planting. It's the quality that they have of what is being planted. And last week, Argentina had only 7% from good to excellent. Only that. Pay attention to this. Argentina is a very important contender in the market, when last year we had 23. So Argentina, in the final quarter of 2022, was the driest in the past years, around 44% below of the normal and 34% even drier compared to the same period of last year. The drought would lower the yields, but not only that, also reduce the surface planted, 600,000 less hectares, and the stock of El Rosario cut off drastically. It's not 3 million less, it's 10 million tons less in Argentina. That's what the locals say. Unfortunately, for February and March, according to the different models, climate models show a low rainfall for the following months. So we must not forget that Argentina is the first exporter of oil and soy meal at international level, okay? And the third exporter of corn globally. So this contender with these problems for the rest of these 2023 is going to produce, is going to export. But I do think that the quality of the product that it's offering is not as good. The other one, how about Brazil? Brazil is huge. We have 2 cycles. The first cycle is okay, very well. The production is on 20 million, very well. But exportable is the second cycle. The harvest. How is Brazil? The incentive to be able to produce is that there's not enough grain internationally. The first cycle is in February and March. I'm interested in the exportable. That's going to be in July. So if Argentina is not doing well, and the exportable offer, important offer in Brazil, is from the second semester on and ends at the end of January or February, ladies and gentlemen, the first semester of 2023, there's nobody else offering quality grain apart from the United States. And this will impact really the basis. That's it. So at the end of last year, they updated the list of the exporters in Brazil. They want all the corn from Brazil. We're talking about China, not the United States. But the United States is present all year long, not Brazil. So rainfall in South America, we still have problems in Argentina, okay. Ukraine. What happens with Ukraine? Well, what happened last year, Ukraine had exported 23.6 million tons, 30% less. This is the last final cycle. The problem is the cost to mobilize them are being discounted in the terminal point. Yes, there are much more costs due to the insurance because they're not insuring vessels. But the most important thing, pay attention to this, 17th of November, were harvested only 50% of the crop of Ukraine. Around 50% of what Ukraine produced has not been harvested. Can you imagine what the quality is going to be? Not only that, they do not have anywhere to store that to be able to work with the corn. It's reducing the offer of exports of quality grain. China. This is the price of the stock in Italian stock in China, of China. The internal price, $11 per bushel. That gives you an idea that China is going to be in the market buying grain. They have not bought from the United States, but if they do need that grain, they will have to buy from the United States. And obviously, even though the policy of zero tolerance changes, those who continue to demand commodities will have to pay attention to these funds. these companies that want to buy cheap and want to sell very expensive. That's easy. The funds, when the final quarter of each year are in negative, they're sold because there's offer of grain in the market. There's a huge production from the United States, but on 21, are long, long, long. They had not been reduced. The problem and the nervousness of many investors due to economic problems, inflation, among other things, well, there has been an increase, yes, but we're very long in the market, and that supports the prices. This graph is seasonality of the corn. One of the main problems that we all really have is that when we a trend that's not well defined, we think that that's never going to change. This is a cycle. Every year changes supply and demand. So when we see the lower levels of price when there's the crop in the main producer of corn in the world, some correction in this year due to that nervousness, economic nervousness, uncertainties, but it starts. So we see the offer and the price starts going up. There's nobody else offering. Up to when? Let's say July, June and July. What happens in July then? When you have an intention of very good crop, in July, we have the pollination, the silking of the corn. And if you have a good surface and a very good climate for that silking process, the possibility of having a very good harvest is very high. And it's going to have a direct impact on the price. This year's not going to be an exception. I do think that the levels of price that we're seeing today that are among 30% higher in the past 5 years is a very important driver to really plant. I was talking with some producers in the Texas border, in the Mexican border, that the seed companies have had very important sales in seeds, but they haven't asked for credits because it's very expensive. But with the levels of price, they do have the money to self-finance themselves. So at the beginning, they begin to speculate how much is going to be planted in the United States. Maybe the producers can say I'm crazy or not, but what starts to be thought of is it's going to the surface, planted surface is going to increase 2 million acres more. So increase of the surface, planting surface with less exports, because Brazil is not going to be very active only until July, increase on the final stock. The possibilities that we see a decline in price in the first, third quarter of this is going to be very high in this year. So, well, to wrap up today, the reduction of production of corn is being seen in the final report, even though the exports are reduced too. The inventories are being reduced in 124, the second lower ones compared to the past 9 years. The stocks on the 1st of December were lower to those forecasted, supporting to the fact that the current bases inside the United States are the highest in the past 20 years. This mix is very exclusive. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. The problem is to really go through the first semester. There's nobody else, only the United States with quality grain for everything you need. But internally, there's a huge demand of grain. We have the possibility to see how are the bases in each origin point, in each producers, cooperatives, traders, and the bases are there. So this is a chapter that we could talk and so on. But the basis really gives me an idea of the reality of the market.
Okay.
In Argentina, they reduced 3 million tons in production, but locals say no. They say it's 10 million more. With a quality of 7% on excellent, what they can be producing, they're not going with the quality that you would expect. The prices, FOB Brazil, are more competitive from the meantime, 8% cheaper than the United States. China is taking advantage of all this. Nevertheless, this will end very quickly. With a crop in Argentina that's been threatened, our perspectives of demand of U.S. grain will improve before the great harvest in Brazil really joins the game. That's going to be at the end of June. The China production is going to increase, but also the consumption. The prices very near to the $11 per bush, create an expectation that we're going to continue to buy in the market, and they're going to buy from the United States. So there's uncertainty in the humanitarian corridor in Russia, Ukraine. Yes, I wouldn't count that in my forecast. Well, but they're exporting, yes, but honestly, I don't think they have the quality. And finally, we could see a low seasonability in the prices in the future. Nevertheless, the trend is low. Is like a bear market. For the first semester, I do think that we're going to see volatility with high basis and demand for product coming from the United States that up till now is not balanced with the agricultural department, but I do think they will catch up very, very soon. Okay, 30 minutes. I did it. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Preguntas, venga.
Juan, gracias.
Thank you very much, Juan. The speakers, they have here all here they say in red, you have 10 minutes, 5 minutes to go. This is the moment we can ask some questions. You can ask the speaker some questions. Please, if anybody has a question, just raise your hand and one of the staff members will give you the microphone. You have a question over here? Perfect, thank you. Raise your hand, please, if you want to ask a question, because we have to make sure that the interpreters can listen to your questions to be able to translate the question and the answer for those who are connected and those who you are present today. Albert is going to monitor also the questions for those who are connected in the virtual session, so please use the question and answers button and you will have also the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you very much. Very interesting new information. We have to really understand that information. That final report left us with impact. So those who are going to buy in the future basis for the third trimester, fourth trimester, do we have to wait? How long approximately? How is the accelerated nowadays with that overview? The problem that we have with this market is the following. One of the actions that we see is buy for the rest of the year and relax. But that is very harmful. That's dangerous because what I just mentioned in the shift from one cycle to another, from July to September, normally in the Chicago stock in the future, the difference of the future are inventory charges. When we have exceeding stock, but when there's not enough in the market and the market wants it today, not afterwards, they discount the price. So there's an inverse. The longer it's the cheaper. The problem is this one for the owner of the grain that I'm going to buy. When I go to the following months to keep on with my operation, that negative difference, I have to absorb it. I have to take that negative number that it's more expensive and more expensive. Reviewing the offer basis of grains in some cooperatives, not all of them, but some of them who are working with offers for the new crops, the different in July and September in internal basis, you're talking about $20-30 per ton cheaper in September. If you buy everything in July, it's going to be expensive. So what do I have to do as a buyer to have an inverse market? Help me here. What do I have to do? I need to buy immediate needs. It's difficult, yes, because there's no grain at all. The bases are very, very expensive. You have the pressure of your boss, and they say you're out of the budget. That's not the budget. It's I. We have to really. We have to. We cannot stay. The plant cannot be stopped. I hope that never happens to you. So, to keep on by your needs, but I would give the benefit of the new harvest that can come from the United States. The first semester, we can talk everything. The second semester, let's analyze it furthermore, okay? Yes, we have another question. Okay, Carlos, you have a question? Thank you very much. When we talk about oil prices for this year, it's like a joker compared to the forecast you mentioned. You didn't talk about it very much. Could this will end in something to really take care of, into account? Yes, yes. I only had 30 minutes, but I'll keep on answering. Yes, it's going to have a very important aspect. One third of the production that has United States is it's going to be produce alcohol, for example. It has a substantial price. If it lowers 60 or 70 dollars, the barrel is going to impact. So we have to really be on top of that. One more question. I have good news for the questions that we were not able to answer. So he's going to be in tonight, so you can ask him the questions. Final question, Alejandro. 2 questions, okay. Hi, I'm in doubt. You didn't show the forecast of Brazil. It's the main exporter today. What happens? One of the main exporters today. What happens with the political situation of in America, in Latin America, and the situation that is today, the rates in Brazil? Can that affect everything? Yes, of course, it's going to affect. I'm not sure if we're going to have a difficulty tomorrow, but there are rates, but there are 4 points that are going to affect offer, demand, climate, and politics. Because maybe we're going to have a coup d'etat tomorrow, yes, if they take the Congress or not, but we have to carry on. Business as usual, they're working, exporting, importing. So there's a strike. So they exported everything already. So they still have half a year to solve the political problems. So today, if Brazil cannot export at the meantime, it's not a problem for me. We have to really pay attention if in June there's no solution. If that happens, there's a strike or something like that, yes, things can get more complicated. But this is a factor that we really have to take in consideration, yes. You mentioned that the Brazilian corn is 8% lower than the United States, but the difference on the availability of the starch is different. We have a blend versus a dented corn. For the price sack, no. Okay, nutritionists, where are you? But definitely it's not going to affect. Mexico, for example, has been very insistent because they say my grain has got protein, the amount of starch and everything. You can say everything to me. It's quoted on as a forage, as 1, 2, or as one consumption, human consumption. The classification points is not the amount of protein, starch. No, it's different for the classification and standardization of the price as such. But once in the market, when you need the analysis that you should need, could have an overprice. But for the price SAC on basis, no. Thank you very much, Juan. Hand of applause for Juan. Thank you very much. And as I said, Juan will be in tonight's reception. So you can ask them any questions you may have for the following presentation, quality report of the crop of in the cycle 22-23. We have Alexander. I'm sorry for my French. Grabois from the manager of strategic processes in the United States. In his role, he supports the programs of development of the market and offers his experience and commercial services to the office of the council, and furthermore to strengthen the relationships with the trades in the United States and the users in the rest of the world. Before arriving to the council, Alexander had 1 decade of experience as a commercial representative in ProChile, and has worked in the Council of Chile in New York and for the Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Alexander has a master's degree in public administration and in international relationships. In this question session, he will be joined by Lee Singleton. He's senior consultant of Centric Company, who developed this report and has been working since 2012 with financial analysis, agricultural aspects, and research in the market. He has a master's degree in business management from the Indiana University. Approved the 2 exams of the study plans of Charter for Analyst, and has the experience of his trades in Illinois. Is involved in all the phases of trade reports in the council according to Corn 2012 and 2013. Especially determines the assignation of the sample, orders the sampling and elevators, generating the results of the reports, and is producer of several sections and has editorial function for those. Alexander and their Lee virtually, so you are welcome. You have the floor.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you. Thank you, Ana Maria, for your very generous introduction. And thank you all for being here with us today. Today, I would like to present the results of the harvest quality report for the 22-23 cycle, corn harvest that is. This is the 12th year that we have produced this report, and thank you, Liz, and thank you to the Centric team for all their help. And what we would like to do with this report is basically do an evaluation of all the trends and all the factors that affect the quality of corn. Again, we produce 2 annual reports, one during the harvest, which is what we're presenting today, and we have another report, an export report that we produce in March. So it is very important that you guys pay close attention for any news in those reports. It is also important for us to produce this report because our objective is to produce information or to give information to you, our clients, information with regards to the quality of the corn and with regards to what we see with regards to the harvest. As we all know, there are many, many factors that play a very important factor with regards to grains imports and exports, storage, harvest, and other factors as well. We are going to evaluate 4 different factors, great factors, which includes a specific weight, broken corn, foreign material, total damage, and heat damage. Also, moisture, although it is not a factor that affects the grades, is a very important factor. So we're going to analyze this under the same umbrella, under the same space. Physical factors include stress cracks, 100 grains weight, grain volume, true density, whole grains, hard endosperm. And with regards to the chemical composition, we include important things such as protein, starch, and oils. And of course, we're going to speak about mycotoxins as well. The first three, which are the most common, aflatoxins, DON or vomitoxin, and fumonisin. But of course, we're going to also mention ochratoxin A, T2, and cerealinone. With this, I would like to continue speaking about the different growing conditions and the impacts with regards to the harvest. As you can see on the slide, wet, moist conditions during April and May slowed down the planting, and the silking was accelerated when hotter days came further on in May during the silking. Pollination was also similar to the 5-year average, and it is important to know that drought and heat were important during the grain filling process.
El cultivo fue sembrado más tarde.
Again, planting was done later than what is normally done, and during the silking, they had hot and dry conditions, basically very good conditions. With regards to the other factors that were important with regards to climate, the delay with regards to the planting basically were because the cold, wet conditions and the growth was affected by the heat. Pollination was similar, or the silking stage was similar. Except for the eastern half of the Gulf ECA, grain developed in general average conditions, while heat and drought elsewhere enhanced protein and hard endosperm concentrations. Dry conditions at the end of the season led to rapid field drying and timely our efficiency with regards to the harvest of dry grains. And I would like to highlight other key aspects with regards to the 2022-2023 harvest. One is that 59% of the harvest was graded as good or excellent, although we had a smaller yield. By October 30th, the harvest had been collected up to 76%. This was above the figures of 2021 and above the 5-year average. Other factors that we need to highlight is that a specific weight was higher. In addition to the BCFM, or broken corn fiber material, were also higher in addition to stress cracks. Total damage, starch, oil, 100 grain weight, and whole grains were also lower. We had similar conditions with regards to moisture and real density. Now we're going to speak about the details. As you know, U.S. grains are graded in 5 different categories. U.S. corn, that is, grade 1, grade 2, 3, 4, and 5. But to have these grades, we have to comply with the conditions for all the conditions for the grading. In this study, we included 600 samples. 81.5% of those samples were met the conditions for grade 1. This is compared to 90% in 2021. And 95.3 of all the samples had or met the conditions to be graded as grade number 2, compared to 98% in 2021. The aggregate average quality of the 600 samples that were analyzed was better than all the requirements for grade 1 factor. When we speak about specific weight, 75.3 kilograms per hecto. And this was above the 5-year average, and 93.1 was graded as number 1. And as you can see, the specific weight was mean for the Gulf, and it was higher for the Gulf area, which is important for those of you that import from Mexico. Another important factor that we're all aware of is BCFM, broken corn foreign material. The aggregate average of BCFM was 79% and 92% met the conditions to be graded as grade number one. This is above the 5-year average, and this was similar in the three different export collection areas. But we're going to speak now individually about BCFM, because we can see that most BCFM is basically broken corn, and indeed it was 0.7% as indicated in the study, a little bit higher than the 5-year average, but it was relatively the same in the three collection areas. Something that is also important is that BCFM is 90. It retains 95% of its nutritional value. So although it is broken, it remains, or it keeps its nutritional value, and its uses. With regards to foreign material, we have a little bit less concentration, 0.2%, which is the same as the 5-year average. 89.5 had less than 0.5% of foreign materials. When we speak about whole grains, 91% or in these studies were whole grains, and this is not an important factor for grading. But when we speak about BCFM, yes, it is important to know the percentage of whole grains. There was a lesser percentage in the Gulf, and perhaps this is related to climate conditions because they had drier conditions in that area. When we speak about total damage and heat damage, the average was 2% lower, and heat damage was 0% this year. Moisture, although it is not a factor for grading, it's something that is quite important for our buyers, for our clients. As a matter of fact, this is included in many of the agreements that you sign, and in this case, we had a similar percentage compared to previous years, 16.3%. The highest moisture was at the Gulf area, but it was quite similar to, well, actually it was way higher than the Southern Railway and the Pacific Northwest. Now we're going to speak about the chemical composition of the grains that we analyzed. Protein concentration is reduced if we do not have nitrogen on the ground, and also during the years of lower yields, the relationship between protein and starch is an inverse relationship. In other words, if we have more protein, we have less starch, and vice versa. In this case, the aggregate value of protein was higher than the 5-year average, 8.8%, and we had also less protein in the Gulf area. And what this means, what does this mean for starch then? Well, this means that there was a lower percentage. Starch had an average of 71%, 71.9% aggregate percentage, and the Gulf ECA usually has a higher percentage of starch, and we do know that the U.S. has a competitive advantage with regards to starch extraction and with regards to the percentages of starch in the grains that can be extracted. And again, it's an advantage compared to other sites, and this is something that we are analyzing at the U.S. Grains Council to see how we can maximize that potential. With regards to oil is actually lower than in previous years. The percentage is 3.9%, the aggregate percentage, and it is relatively the same in all the ECAs, export collection areas, that is. And of course, oil is an essential part for different industries, including the livestock industry. It is the main energy source It facilitates the use of vitamins and so on. Oil is also an essential product that comes from dry millers and wet millers. In this report, we also measure additional physical factors, in other words, other quality attributes that do not really affect the grades. I would like to mention a very generic perspective with regards to stress cracks. Here you go. Again, stress cracks are very important when we look at drying and when we look at the different climate effects, as Juan mentioned during his presentation in detail. But again, this basically reinforces what he said. We have density, we have kernel weight, volume, and density, and this relates to the moisture levels that we have mentioned before. I would like to continue with this table that we have on the slide. This table presents a very generic perspective, and it gives you the most important figures with regards to what we analyze, of course. Let's continue speaking about stress cracks. Again, 600 samples. The average of those 600 samples had an average of 6.9% with regards to stress cracks. Standard deviation of 5.2%. And also to the right, we have the minimum and the maximums. So there was a shipment that actually had 0 stress cracks, and we had another one that had 66%. That was the maximum. And when we speak about stress cracks, we had more stress cracks in the Gulf area. And we had an average that was above the 5-year average in all the ECAs. Dry conditions came after maturity. The late planting was also compensated, as mentioned before, due to the hotter conditions. And the 100 grain weight had an average of 33.9, and the Gulf had the highest average with regards to the other areas. In other words, this indicates that grains were larger than in the other ECAs, and in the Northwest Pacific Northwest ECA, the grains are usually smaller as well. And when we look at grain volume, Gulf had the highest figures, followed by the Southern Railway, and this implies that grain that goes to Mexico and Latin America is going to be a little bit bigger than the grain that is sent to Asia. Volume is affected by photosynthesis, by the name of grains that are silk, and by the genetics and the level of fertilization. And in general terms, softer corn is due to its real density. When we speak about hard endosperms, this is very, very important for milling. Those of you that work with wet mills prefer percentages greater than 90%. Well, excuse me, is the opposite. Again, it's the opposite. Dry millers prefer 90% horneous endosperm, while wet millers prefer this between 70% and 80%. So we're right in the middle of being preferred by wet and dry millers. Again, grains were actually softer at the ECA Gulf, and with regards to the Pacific Northwest and the Southern Railway, were 88 were the same. The percentage was again higher compared to the 5-year average of 81%. Now I'm going to speak about mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are, of course, a very important part of this analysis, and it is very important to begin with a disclaimer. We conduct this analysis during harvest time, and there are different factors that play a very important role before the grains reach their final destination. And again, we used 600 samples. It is very important for you to conduct the same analysis when you receive the grain, especially with regards to mycotoxins, because the grains suffer changes during the export. We would like to present and evaluate measurable values of the three mycotoxins, aflatoxin, DON, and fumonisin. And we would also like to present a perspective of ochratoxin, T2, and cerealinone. And we're going to see in detail the results of this analysis and how this topic advances, and we will see that in the March report. There are four different types of aflatoxins that we find naturally in food: B1, B2, G1, and G2, and these four are commonly known as aflatoxins. And again, this is important. It is important to say that the samples that did not have any aflatoxins were lower than in the prior 2 years. 98.3%, in other words, were below the level of action of the FDA, which is 20 parts per billion. Conditions of the growing season were proper for the development of aflatoxin in some areas. And as we can see in this graph, the only year during which we had a higher samples was 2012, when we had a drought that year. So again, this is 2012, again this drought year, and again we can see the aflatoxin level was way high that year. It was the only year when we had higher levels. And when we speak about vomitoxin on DON, the percentage of samples below 1.5 ppm was lower than in 2021 and 2020. Only one sample was above the FDA recommendation levels, which is 5 ppms. And when we speak about fumonisin, the percentage was below 5 ppms. It was a bit higher than in 2021 and a bit higher than in 2020 as well. And in this analysis, there were no samples indicating ochratoxin, and this is the third year in a row that we analyzed for that mycotoxin. We had the same situation for T2, and this indicates that, and again, this indicates that we had an analysis that did not find any T2, and I understand that climate or weather played a very important role with regards to these results. Cerealinone, again, this was part of this analysis, and 100% of the 600 samples that we analyzed did not present this mycotoxin or aflatoxin. And again, it is important when we speak about conclusions, it is important to understand that this is based on the analysis that we conducted with Centrix. But again, it is very important for you to do your own analysis once you receive your products in your destination. When we speak about conclusions, and I would like to close by mentioning two very important topics, we saw that the samples during this season were quite good. 95.3 of all the samples had a grade 2 or better than that, and this is compared to 98% in 2021 and 94.5% in 2020. Specific weight, BCFM, protein, and stress cracks were also higher than the 5-year average, while total damage and grain volume were actually lower. This reflects the conditions of the planting season and the harvest. In some areas, the growing season was quite proper for the development of aflatoxins. With this, thank you very much for your time, and we are available to answer any questions that you might have. So we are open for questions. Alexander, thank you very much for your presentation. Again, right now this is the space for questions. Please raise your hand and wait for a microphone to ask your question. And we're also going to give some time for our virtual participants to ask questions. So Carlos and Alejandro, you guys have the microphones. Please bring the microphones to whoever raises their hand. We have two people raising their hands, so one on each side, please. Thank you. Tremendous amount of information. My question is, this are harvest analysis. Is there any type of monitoring after the storage period, after the grains come out of storage? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, thank you for the question. It is a very relevant question. We have a report that comes out in March that is the export report right before the grain is put on the ship. And Lee, if you are connected, do you have any replies for this question? Do you have any additional replies? Again, Lee, if we can, Lee, can you hear us? We believe Lee has connected. Lee is connected.
Your camera on?
It won't let me share.
Okay.
You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, okay. We're gonna work on that. Sorry about that. Do you have a comment on the question here about? Yep. Okay, go ahead.
I think the biggest thing is that the samples are collected as or from Fegis as the vessels or rail cars are being loaded for export. So it's the samples are taken during Fegis's normal grading and sampling procedures.
Para quienes no alcanzaron, si alguien no alcanzó a ponerse los audífonos y necesitaba interpretación, tal vez le va a pedir a Lee y no sé, producción, si podemos sacar el sonido del intérprete en español sobre la voz de Lee. Gonzalo, pregunta. ¿Podemos sacar el audio del intérprete para que no tengan ellos que hacer el switch a interpretación?
Again, they're working on a technical difficulty. Basically, Ana is asking the logistics people if the Spanish speakers could hear the voice of the interpreter without having to use the translation device. Otherwise, what we can do is ask Felipe, me, to use a microphone so everyone can hear me without having to use their translation radios.
Pero como estábamos en presentación en español, no los tenían puesto la...
Again, Ana is asking the logistics staff if it is possible for the Spanish speakers to hear my voice without the translation device. Lee, can you hear us?
Okay. Thank you. Glad to know. So we're kind of working here on
What Anna is saying, Lee, is that we're having some technical issues with regards to interpretation. Actually,
Spanish. So
what Anna is...
I'm going to open up for another...
What Anna is asking the logistics people is if they can somehow have my voice being projected in the room without translation devices. And again, Anna is saying this to you, Lee. There's a question from Alejandro. Alejandro says, I am quite surprised that the results were zero heat damage when moisture levels were 16.3%. My question is what happens after the grains reach the elevator and so on. I'm sure there were some heat damage. What happened in that case? I'm going to ask Lee to answer that question. Again, Lee was the one responsible for the analysis, so perhaps he can give us additional details as to what was the case. Lee, is the question clear to you?
I think most of the samples, I'm sure some of them were dried on farm prior to delivery to the elevator. So these samples were collected at the first point of sale, but notwithstanding that, most of these samples are coming directly from the field. So they wouldn't have had the opportunity to be artificially dried. So that's where we get the lack of heat damage. And all of these samples were tested by a Fegis licensed lab, the same labs that test the samples prior to export for the grade factors. So that's the biggest reason why we didn't see heat damage, that most of these samples are coming directly from the field.
Yo voy a resumir.
Which won't be the case during the export report.
Yo voy a resumir la respuesta de
Anna says she's going to summarize your answer, Lee. What Anna is rephrasing, Lee, is that again, for those of you that are not listening to translation through the devices, again, please keep in mind that the samples are taken at harvest point. And again, what Lee just said is that most of the samples being analyzed come directly from the field and have not been necessarily dried. So this is normal. And based on the prior 11 reports, I can definitely say that we do see that this report at harvest point, there are no samples with heat damage. And when we look or when we analyze for the export reports, we have some heat damage. So again, at harvest point, this is not unusual. Export point, yes, we do see more heat damage. If any of my colleagues would like to expand this information, perhaps Alejandro. Alejandro says, yes, as Anna and Lee indicated in the prior 11 reports, the trend has been the same. It's not something unusual, it's not a problem. Again, in recent years, this situation has evolved, and also drying is not as aggressive as it used to be. Anna continues again the prior question. Can you guys repeat the prior question, please? The question is if again, Anna is asking if we have the technical capacity for my voice translating to be heard in the room. So Anna is asking the person that asked the original question to ask, excuse me, not the first question, the second question that you already answered, Lee. They're asking that person to repeat the question. The first question you just replied, that was with regards to heat damage. So we're going to the other question that was answered, and apparently that question has already been answered as well. Right. The response to that first question is yes, we have a report that has two different sections. The first section is samples at harvest points, and the second part of this report is samples taken at elevator. Again, once the corn has reached the elevators to be exported, that's when we take the second sample. And again, my apologies for these technical difficulties. I wasn't sure. Do we have another question apparently? Yes, we do have another question. Thank you, Alexander, for your presentation. The question is the following. As an individual user, I would like to see mycotoxin levels being analyzed from a more critical perspective with regards to nutrition. 5 ppm of DON is quite high, and also the T2 figures were quite high. Maybe in future analysis you could look at using or at providing more details, because these figures might generate challenges for livestock production. And again, this is just a suggestion and not a request from me. He replies, we're going to consider that, is what Christian just replied. Lee, would you like to comment on that suggestion that was just made with regards to mycotoxins? Again, trying to have lower mycotoxin levels. You, Lee, with regards to the methodology, would you like to expand that answer, or would you like to tell us why those levels were selected?
The purpose of how mycotoxins are reported was mainly to report on the instances of when they were detected, more so than calculating an average level. Yeah, we do break it out into these have instances versus these have, the FDA advisory level, FDA action level. So the samples or the proportion of samples that exceed those values are reported, but I don't think we have enough samples to, and it really was an objective of ours to calculate an average mycotoxin concentration. Just because A, we don't have enough samples, and B, there's so much volatility within mycotoxin measurement and concentration in individual loads and how you sample it, that it becomes pretty hazardous to average mycotoxin concentration across samples. So reporting it with the frequency distribution as we did was something that the council and ourselves kind of jointly agreed would be the best practice. But we can talk about how to better present that in the future to provide more information.
Thank you, Lee. Gracias, Lee. Para quienes no tenían
Anna is rephrasing your question. Rephrasing your answer, Lee. What Anna is replying right now is that the idea of the report is to present the incidents more than the actual level. So she's saying that you, Lee, said that we do not have sufficient samples, and also that volatility with regards to the measurement of those samples would imply an additional risk if we were to give an average number. But yes, Andres, your suggestion is more than welcome, and we're going to analyze what we can do. Our DC team loves to hear these suggestions, and we're going to consider your suggestion. And Lee gave us an explanation as to why it is done the way it is done. A comment from Jorge Ordóñez says, "Good day, everyone. I would suggest expanding the information presented. Again, we have had the lowest starch levels, and also with regards to additional information to reduce BCFM. I would also like to see the AW water activity too, because the 2022 harvest was close to the 0.70 limit, which is ideal. And with this, greetings." And again, that's not a question, that was just a comment. We have different things to consider based on that suggestion. Jorge, thank you for your comment. We're going to go over that. And Christian replies, yes, this is something that we will go over, as well as Anna just replied. Do we have any other questions from you in the auditorium? Anybody in the auditorium? Anybody in the room with any additional questions? No questions? So with this, thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. Our apologies for not being able to have you translated directly into the room without the translation devices, but they all understood your answer with my help as well. Thank you, Lee.
Peter.
Sí, me alegra.
Bueno. Pasamos ahora.
Let's begin with the panel of producers in corn. I would like to invite the speakers, and I would like to say that tonight in the welcoming session there will be also present, together with another group of producers of the United States, so not only from corn producers but also sorghum and barley. So those of us who are going to be here, first of all, we have Patty Mann, producer of corn and soy with a property established in 1997 in Ohio. Patty is the president of the Association of Corn Producers and Wheat Producers of Ohio, and also part of the board of commercialization of corn in Ohio. Together with Patty, we'll have Brett Meyer, who grew in a farm in Iowa. Is a businessman, specialist of international agriculture from the University of Iowa. Currently works with a trade with co-products, helping to administer the risk with the different options. And together we'll have Derek Belton, producer of corn, alfalfa, hay, among other products in Kansas. I'm sorry, I said winner, and it's really livestock producer. Has a license with the University of Kansas, and recently was elected as commissioner of the Corn Association Kansas, apart from being member of the Council in Asia from the U.S. Grains. Together, they will be with Steve Weatherford from Kentucky. Began with the operation in his farm in 1985 and grew to 40,000 acres of soybean, wheat, poultry for Pilgrim spray. is the president of the County of Kentucky and is in the Committee of Poultry in Connecticut of that state, and also is part of the member of the producers in Kentucky. We have Alejandro Gonzalez, our regional consultant for more than 30 years for the U.S. Grain Council here in Latin America. Welcome to the podium.
Alejo. No, Alejo se va a hacer acá. Ujú. Alejo, ¿tienes la pregunta?
Sí.
Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon. Let Anna, you can rest. And welcome. Welcome to this panel of four agricultural farmers in North America who's going to commend some of the experiences and share with us the experience that they had during this year. For this, we would like to ask you some questions. Initially and afterwards, we'll have the possibility to have questions from the audience or for those who are connected virtually. The first question is for Patty Mann, as Anna presented, and it says the following. Could you describe your experience, personal experience, with the harvest 2022-2023 corn harvest? What were those challenges or very important aspects to highlight in the process during the planting, development of the crop, and the harvest? You have the floor, Patty.
22, as was shared earlier, was a little bit of a challenging year for us. I am in northwest central Ohio, which is in the eastern Corn Belt. We were very cool and wet early in the spring. Typically, we like to start planting mid to late April. However, because of the weather, it was mid-May until we finally got started. So we planted in less than perfect conditions. It was kind of a trade-off. Do we wait till we get better conditions? It's getting later in the spring. We just felt like we needed to get started. So we did get a good start. And our earliest crop was pelted by about 2.5 inches of rain shortly thereafter, and led to additional challenges to get through the planting season. After that, we turned off dry for 22 days with no rain, and it was hot during that time. So then during July and August, we got fairly normal rainfall then. So all in all, the corn crop turned out pretty well. Beans never seemed to recover. However, our corn was above our 5-year average. So as far as challenges for 23, kind of the same as what we had on the input side for 22. Fertilizer prices are still quite high, although they have come down somewhat from where they were a year ago. Chemicals, fuel is still high, although lower as well. The fall of 22, we paid the highest prices ever for diesel fuel. So also availability of equipment has been really tough. The demand is really high for both used and new equipment. For example, we were going to trade 2 of our combines a year ago, but that was pending on the deal that the other farmer we were getting them from would get his new combines, which he did not. He still has not to this day. So we're still using our old combines. So it's just a challenge with used equipment. There's just a greater demand than there is supply. So we have also had a little bit of challenge with vomitoxin in last fall in our area. It was pretty localized, but we typically deliver a lot of our crop to an ethanol plant, and they are the most restrictive with their parts per million levels. So a little bit challenged that we're still trying to work through as we store most of our crop and deliver it during the winter. Thank you.
Ok, muchas gracias, Patty. Definitivamente.
Thank you very much, Patty. It's a year that really presents some challenges, as we've heard before. All the businesses, the supply chains have been dealing with the same problems. The second question that we have for Derek, and it says, can you please describe how the use of biotechnology benefit the corn production in the United States?
I come from central Kansas. We have been growing biotech crops, biotech corn more specifically, for probably close to 30 years now. It provides a more sustainable, safer crop that we can produce. We can grow it with less pesticides, less herbicides, therefore reducing the amount of water required to grow that corn. And just as a personal example, this last year, we started off planting corn in pretty good conditions, got into the May timeframe, had adequate rainfall, but our soil conditions, we always like to say we're 2 weeks from a drought and 2 weeks from a flood. We just can't hold that much water. And so when we got to July, it got hot and dry like most of the U.S., and it, excuse me, if 10, 15 years ago, without the use of these biotechnology traits, we probably would not have had corn to harvest. We did have an okay crop, nothing great by any standards, but was at least worthwhile to spend the time to get it out of the field.
Gracias, Derek. Sí, definitivamente.
Yes, Derek, definitely. Faced with all the challenges that we have in terms of climate, the availability of these biotechnology seeds enables us, or enable you as agriculture farmers, to support these conditions, the adverse conditions presented during the cycle, the crop cycle. Very well. The third question would be for Brett, and it says, what are your expectations, production expectations in corn in the United States in the following 3 to 5 years? Do you expect that the yields continue increasing? What are the internal and external factors that are more relevant that can affect the production in the United States?
So I grew up in Iowa, and we have a saying there, and it's corn is king. I personally do not see corn acres really changing a whole lot in the next 3 to 5 years. This past few years, we've seen record high input prices due to various factors. And from my experience, the American farmer has still been planting corn over any other crop. I think I looked at the last 5 to 6 years, we've been planting anywhere from like 87 to 93 million corn acres a year. I know it's a 6 million acre range, but I don't necessarily expect anything to change on that front, especially as Juan was talking about earlier. Prices right now are really good, and right now farmers have every incentive to plant as many acres as they can, whether it's corn, beans, wheat, all the prices are up there. Internal, external market factors. Ethanol margins aren't the best, but they're still strong. So you're going to continue to see demand for ethanol production with corn. We need the DDGs for feed. Trying to think external. We have had some issues with exports this past year. Regardless of whether China was wanting to buy or not, or other countries, Mississippi River was at a record low at one point. We were having to light load barges over, I think, only 66% of capacity what we can normally put on there. So we were having to find other storage places for corn, other uses. In terms of yield, if you look at a long-term trend, it's just continuing to go higher. And I would expect that to continue to go higher, especially because of the biotech traits, the genetics that Derek was talking about. They seem to just keep getting better and better. 2021, Western Iowa, we had what we thought was a drought, but we just kept getting those rains every 2 weeks right when we thought it was the most crucial time, and we saved it, and we had a record crop. Up until August, no one would have thought it was possible, but just showed to us that what genetics have done have really come a long ways, and I think if we could get a good growing year, get the crop in on time, sufficient moisture, I mean, I think the corn yield will start to really increase.
Muchas gracias por sus.
Thank you very much for your comments. It's important to consider that Brett comes from the state of Iowa, the highest maize producer. Maize is the king, corn is the king. So it's important to listen to the fact that the area is constant, but there is a very important incentive for the farmer to plant on the current prices that we have. And with the presence of these biotechnology seeds, he considers that the yield will continue in that growing trend as it's been doing in the past years. So let's ask the final question for Steve, and it says the following. With the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the people around the world knew the role of Russia in the supply of fertilizers. Could you comment on the availability of fertilizers in the United States? What was the impact of this armed conflict for the American producer regarding this raw material, this product?
Thank you for this opportunity. Fertilizer is a global demand now for fertilizer. You've heard here that Argentina and Brazil is really come onto the market. In order to grow corn, you need fertilizer. In western Kentucky, where I'm from, close to the Mississippi River, and it did pretty much dry up this year. It's hard to believe. But saying that, United States imports most of its phosphorus from China, Morocco, a couple other small countries. Phosphate comes from Canada, and of course, nitrogen is manufactured. Most of the components in it is natural gas, or natural gas, yes. On my operation, we have broiler houses. We use a lot of chicken litter. We have 8 houses producing approximately 150 tons per house. We apply 2 tons to the acre. We can get over 900 acres with another 4 barns that we manage. So that helps on fertilizer prices, but now we have to really concentrate on soil sampling, grid sampling, placing fertilizer the right amount at the right place. So saying that, it has been a challenge. Fertilizer prices last year, some fertilizers doubled in price. We did not have any availability issues, but the price really doubled. We had some transportation and labor issues. Thank you.
Gracias, Steve.
Thank you very much, Steve. The fact of the cost of the fertilizers did impact us. It's important to highlight that topic, the paper, the role of the technology today. At the moment when we plant, that fertilizer doubled the price, as you mentioned. So we have to have it very clear. Where is that the field needs in order to spend the least fertilizer possible? So without further ado, we would be finishing the first round of questions, and we would like to open the floor if anybody wants to ask the panel members the questions. Albert, I'm not sure if you have somebody in Zoom who would like to ask a question, 2 questions. Where are the microphone guys? Here they are. Thank you very much. A question for the panel members. If the grain will be contaminated with aflatoxin, it's a question I've always asked myself. The purchase penalized if it's highly contained with mycotoxin? Are penalized? They are penalized in the price? They are affected? Does that affect the price of the corn? Who would like to answer the question? Is the price affected due to the amount of mycotoxins?
If there are significant toxin levels at harvest, there are dockages, there are discounts directly related to those levels that come right off the top of the price.
Definitely, and not only with the aflatoxins, but remember that if they have much more moisture or whatever levels of or parameters in classification grading, that will reduce the price. Yes, you can answer.
I'm just going to add that in my experience in the industry, I've seen a lot of places will also just outright reject it. They won't take the truck, they won't discount the farmer for the corn, they just won't dump it.
And it's also important, the comment that Brett talks about, depending on the level, well, they can the price is not going to be only reduced, it's rejected. The product is being rejected. That may happen. Another question? I would like to ask the panel members, in terms of profitability by acre and production unit, how was the behavior last year? For example, there were very increases in inputs last year. How was the behavior of that profitability compared to 2021, 2020, that we had cost structures that were different? We all know that prices of the grain have increased due to the global conditions. Did that compensate the increase in costs, or maybe the profitability of the producers of corn in the United States? Was it better? Anybody can answer who would like to share your experience or share some numbers.
Last year, fertilizer prices being up, price of fuel, price of equipment, very tough year, quite a bit higher than input costs than the year before. This year we had a drought in our area. We made half a crop. Last year we had a bumper crop in our area. So as far as numbers, I'd have to have my book with me, but profitability was down quite a bit this past year.
Yeah, I would second that as well. You know, just a lot of challenges with margins, and you really need a good yield, because if you don't have price or yield, you're in trouble. But we were fortunate, you know, we could still maintain profitability because we did have decent yields.
Gracias por esos comentarios.
Thank you very much for your comments. Yes, you have another question? Thank you very much. We all know that mycotoxins like T2, DON are produced by a fungus. But the fungus is there since the plant is planted, and this can vary in much more grade or due to other factors, or climate maybe. But it's also been said that modifying, changing the characteristics of that harvest could reduce these fungus in the harvest. Is there any advancement in the planting systems and harvest systems in corn to reduce the contamination due to this fungus? Is there any other system?
goes with dry weather mainly. The vomitoxin in wheat goes with wet weather. There are some varieties that are a little more resistant, but there is no chemical or anything that we can put on because it is more weather related than anything that's out of our hands.
My experience has been it's typically created by early season stress followed by a wet spell. So that was exactly what we experienced. And we also have hybrids now that where the husk on the ear remains pretty tight, and the characteristics of certain hybrids are for that ear to remain upright versus dropping. So it kind of just acts as a funnel, and any moisture that it gets in, it just holds on to it. So that creates the challenge right there. But as Steve said, yeah, as far as I know, there's no fungicides right now on the market that can control it.
Okay, gracias.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Ahí viene el micrófono ya.
You have the microphone, yes. Talking about mycotoxins, are you working with a line of corn genetically modified or that it's resistant to mycotoxins? Do you know anything about this?
At this point, like they mentioned previously, where I'm at, we deal more with aflatoxin than vomitoxin, but it's a little bit maybe different than the vomitoxin. Is it's the early season good weather to a late season dry, and like she said, that ear stays upright. As far as we know, there aren't any hybrids being worked on. There might be something I'm unaware of, but nothing that's been brought to market.
Okay, vamos a.
Very well. We have time constraints. They're going to be tonight in tonight's ceremony, so we will have the opportunity to ask them any questions that you may have or any doubts they may have. So we'd like to thank the panel members for the participation, and you can ask them the questions tonight. Thank you very much.
Bueno, agradecemos de nuevo a
Thank you very much. We'd like to thank our panel members for sharing their experience with us. We'd like to remind you that they're going to be tonight in the welcoming reception. Please ask them the questions. We have 6 additional producers coming from different states in the United States. This is a very important opportunity to clarify all the doubts that you may have, because I've always had the doubt, and this is the opportunity to ask the questions. So a hand of applause for our panel members. Thank you very much for your participation.
Bueno, vamos ahora con la última.
Okay, towards the final presentation before the coffee break. Presentation is going to be in charge of Carlos Suarez, Manager of Sustainability, Politics and Innovation from the U.S. Grain Council. He worked with the Council as regional consultant for ethanol in Latin America, promoting the benefits and advantages of ethanol of the United States in global energetic transmission. Before the Council, he worked as Associate Director for the Development of Businesses in Latin America, with Nature Conservancy, and is a specialist of commercial services of the United States and economic specialist for the State Department in Colombia. Has a license degree in international businesses from the Universidad del Rosario, Management of Global Risk in Spain, and an MBA in Canada. Carlos will talk about the efforts of the Council to improve the knowledge of the sustainable production practices in the United States. Carlos, you have the floor. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much for being here today. I promise that by the end of our presentation, if you stay with me, we're going to have a delicious coffee break. It's just a little bit, only 30 minutes. Today, I would like to start telling you a story, a real story that happened in a place similar to this one with nutritionists. And in one of these conferences, one of these nutritionists is doing his presentation and telling everything he knows about the products. And somebody raises a hand and asks, what happened? How sustainable is your product? And that expert in nutrition starts thinking, and you don't know how to start to, he doesn't know how to start to answer. And so the idea is that you deal with me and understand the processes of what happens when we're thinking about sustainability. So in the current context, what does being sustainable mean? It's a very simple concept with a definition by the United Nations that is basically to satisfy the needs that we have in the present, guaranteeing that we have the resources for the future generations. But when we begin to talk about this, we're talking about food, housing, we're talking about a lot of things, and at what level? Not only about this, talking about basic needs, but also in what context. That's when we see that things get difficult, because it's not the same as countries like India with a high population, China also, and compared to countries that have obtained advanced levels of development like the United States and the European Union, or the emerging countries like ours in Latin America and Africa. So, context, needs, we try to understand how to start to talk about sustainability. We all know that when we listen to the news, that there are being developed different frameworks on how to approach to that complex aspect. When we talk about food, we can see that the DSGs have defined certain actions that we have to do if we want to obtain that sustainability level, and to avoid those situations that at that moment Thomas Matus concerned the humanity regarding the capacity to really feed a growing population at the time. Fortunately, the technology and different advancements enabled the humanity in a way to overcome that challenge to feed much more people, talking about the Green Revolution. But today we are facing a new challenge, the concept of planetary limits that we hadn't heard before. So we have scientific organizations that are saying that there's a certain capacity in different dimensions that the planet can really supply. Among that, the integrity of biosphere, chemical aspects, and other things like climate change in that circle that you see here that indicates the color where more or less concerned we should be. So in that sense, we find ourselves in a framework, in a systemic framework, where sustainability cannot be analyzed individually, but inside the systems where we are, where the key elements associated to the food include the chain that you all know, but also are highlighted in among other regulatory forces like politics, economic systems, demands, and supply and demand that we find them in the market, as well as the environmental factors. So we have to focus, when we talk about sustainability, on the impacts that the food production has in the environment. In that sense, the conversation is beginning to be more complex because the food production is being done in ecosystems that are in critical risk, where there's a huge concern about the erosion of the land and depleting also of the hydric resources, without mentioning those areas that are high value of conservation, where the agricultural border is being expanded or the agricultural production is creating exceeding other things that will affect the ecosystem. So that complexity is leading to the fact that in the global level, we must really be concerned of what will really affect those ecosystems, and it has to do with the greenhouse gas emissions. I would like to focus on the fact that when we talk about sustainability, how what comes to the first to the mind? What the greenhouse gas? The conference of parts. This is what the press shows us very extensively, and in this sense, this has to do with the science developed that has quantified that the planet is getting hotter due to the emissions in the different countries and is projected in the future. So what we're trying to do inside that the important conversation debate is to have that global warming that's 0.5 centigrades that you see in a certain way is our objective to really not alter more the ecosystems and to maintain the life relatively as we know it. We find also that the impacts and the risk that have been identified appear very specific for the land ecosystems, and that they are going to have an impact on the yields of agriculture. In this global debate has led us to the fact that different actors are focusing on the emissions as related to the activities of different parts. And what has been identified is that in the world, 25% of the emissions come from the agricultural sector. In a general sense, this can be, we can dive in detail and complexity. I'm not going to talk about that graph, but basically what I'm saying is that science has quantified each one of the elements that contribute to those greenhouse gas emissions and that are being a concern when we talk about sustainability. You can see in the percentage distribution, agriculture represents 25%. 70% has to do with the use of energies to develop the rest of the activities that we as humanity deal with. So what does that represent for the production and food consumption? Not in general sense, but specific for the companies with which you work for the customers that consume the products related with the activity you work with. Let's begin with the consumers, who recently have had our empowerment and have, due to the concern for global warming and climate change, want to lead actions, specific actions aligned with that intent of reducing the environmental impacts. There we find in the chart that you see, we see the intent of reducing the food waste, reducing water waste, and other activities related with the sustainable consumption. So we are getting near the fact that leads us to be here. The companies, what are they going to do regarding sustainability? This has been analyzed for many years, and we have found that in the market there are different products with different labels that have a validity or inside the market. In this chart, you find here,
you can see many products, and again, companies have realized that they're not interested in producing some of this, and they're focusing on those products that generate high trust. For instance, organic labels. However, companies, based on surveys, have discovered another very important challenge, and that challenge is that consumers are not willing to pay for sustainability, regardless of them being aligned or not with sustainability in their lifestyles. So, yes, companies have to tackle that issue as well. What can we do with regards to that? So, on the third table on the slide, we can see how companies are positioning or aligning themselves with regards to what they think is most profitable and to what makes more sense. And as we can see, they are focusing on packaging, and they're also focusing on the specific attributes of the products. What attributes or what characteristics are we speaking about? Basically, we're speaking about environmentally friendly, low carbon or neutral carbon, and sustainable. And this is where we come in with regards to the sustainable sourcing. What does that mean? Basically, it means that companies, and again, this is gaining importance. Again, more and more companies are beginning to see what they call sustainability reports. In other words, they want to communicate what's happening inside their supply chains. And those tables that we frequently see, similar to what we mentioned with regards to prices. And again, those tables indicate how frequently someone is searching in Google the word sustainability report. So yes, on one side, the professional side, or on the consumer side, or on both sides, we are seeing peak times with regards to sustainability reports for 2021. And aligned with this, companies are trying to identify how to position themselves, especially with regards to the tremendous changes that we have seen since COVID, when we used to think about sustainability only in environmental terms, but now we think about social, government, and environmental sustainability. So, with regards to the agricultural side, its supply chains, we see a scenario with more than 322 standards that want to tackle this issue. Again, 322 standards, 166 belong to the agricultural sector. So, with regards to sustainable supply, we can see that interest in this area is growing, as well as the actions that are being implemented, both with an international scope as well as with products that are focused for national change. And as you might have seen in the news, Europeans are taking or want to take the lead with regards to what sustainable consumption is supposed to mean. And in this situation, access to markets is one of these criteria. So yes, we see how this criteria relates to deforestation. We can see how this also relates to taxes based on the carbon intensity of different products. And again, this is giving us guidelines as to the importance that sustainability is gaining for businesses. So, to summarize what I have said so far, basically we have seen that there are three key spokes person, governments, people, and supply chains, and they also have three main challenges with regards to communication that have to deal or that have to that are related to the sustainability criteria, to the regulations, as well as to the guidelines for sustainable purchasing. So focusing furthermore on what I just mentioned, what are the implications that result with regards to livestock nutrition and the work that we all do? Well, first, implication is that we have to recognize the importance identified by the different actors in the system. Again, the importance of the impact of livestock activities with regards to greenhouse effect gases emission. We have also identified other factors: deforestation, water uses, or soil health. But for our specific purpose today, the most relevant one deals with climate change and with greenhouse effect gas emissions. And as many of you might have identified, bovine livestock generates the largest portion of greenhouse gases, and it is followed by swine production and so on. And specifically, you can also see the division of the different emissions related to different livestock production. We can see here enteric, fermentation, and animal nutrition that both of them represent close to 85% of the greenhouse effect gases. On the right, you can see the contribution either by methane, nitrous oxide, or carbon dioxide, but you also see two orange arrows to the left. And again, I think they relate very much to our activities. Enteric fermentation and animal nutrition is what you guys do on a day-to-day basis. So I think this is not surprising to any of you, and it's not going to be surprising if in a few months someone asks you how sustainable is your formulation, and this is why we have to be prepared for this possible conversation. So when we speak about greenhouse effect emissions, we can see that there are three scopes with regards to the emissions. The first one is with regards to companies inside the supply chain, and in the case of livestock production, this refers to the emissions that we control and that relate to the energy that we consume in our activities. But when we speak to our clients further down the supply chain, perhaps a client that is a restaurant or a supermarket, those clients would be interested in knowing which of their suppliers knowing the emissions of their suppliers, and this deals with scope number 3. So again, basically this means as to how I can contribute through my activities to emissions of a third part, and this is the main point of these conversations. And again, this is because companies are seeing more and more pressure to reduce their carbon intensity. So inside this context, we are saying that the ingredients that are being used either for animal nutrition or either for human nutrition or for any other manufacturing process, again, we always want to know the carbon intensity of the process, and frequently this sustainability is being measured in those terms. And fortunately, we are developing initiatives that want to provide tools to professionals such as you, tools to respond with regards to the carbon intensity of a specific product. I'm only going to mention this database of the GFLI. This is an animal nutrition institute, and this institute takes products from different origins and compares the carbon intensity of those products to be able to conduct an analysis as to how different formulations contribute inside this criteria. So at this point of my presentation, I'm going to pause briefly to let you know that we as a council, and this is basically what I mentioned before, we as a council are going to broadcast to you the launching of a new tool that is going to allow us to work in this complex situation that I have described. Although I believe that you have heard about sustainability with regards to many other products, we as a council began to work on this topic or began to work on this conversation. So in this sense, to mention those three actors that I mentioned before, we're going to be launching pretty soon 2 new products. The first one is a protocol to guarantee corn sustainability or corn sustainability assurance protocol, and also we're going to use the 2 acronyms for this. So these 2 products are based or built on the institutional strength of regulations, laws, and all other norms that exist in the United States to guarantee sustainability in different dimensions, not only with regards to greenhouse effect emissions, but also many other areas. And the idea of this is to differentiate American products from other origins. And again, we're not only speaking about regulations now. In addition to regulations, we have private sector initiatives led by entities such as the National Corn Growers Association, NCGA, and other different corn producers association, many of which are present here today. And these associations have expressed their aspirations with regards to corn sustainability, American corn sustainability, and they have also committed to reducing the environmental impacts that are related to our activity. Again, some of these activities include greenhouse effect emissions and soil health, as well as the use of energy and water. And again, this is something that has existed for many decades and that has been measured thanks to partners such as Field to Market. Field to Market is a non-profit association that has a systemic approach to this topic, and they have demonstrated how in recent decades corn production has improved to a large extent thanks to the implementation of better production practices as well as the use of biotechnology. So we're going to be launching our two new products, and I'm going to describe these two products in the next 10 minutes. First one is CSAP, Corn Sustainability Assurance Product, and this is going to summarize regulations, best practices, frameworks, and so on, with the idea of allowing different actors in the corn supply chain to have a baseline to communicate how sustainable U.S. corn is. So this CSAP is a tool that is promoted by producers, and it is not a response to a specific regulation from any country or from any company. Instead, it wants to promote or foster producers to have this conversation under the premise of having continuous improvement. So this CSAP or CSAP tool has 3 different levels. The first level identifies the 11 different categories in which corn production has different environmental or social impacts, and it details specific objectives related to each one of those impacts. And finally, it collects and describes the best practices as well as specific laws that represent sustainability for the different impact categories. These are the 11 categories that recognize the complexity with regards to sustainability, and sustainability can change from one production area to another one. And again, it is not necessary to mention the vast area of the United States. So for each one of these impact categories, we have different improvement objectives that industries want to achieve, and again they range from greenhouse effect emissions, including electricity and water use, including the use of agronutrients and so on, and different chemicals. And this also includes the relationship with our communities, the health of our employees, and many other categories and impact areas. So as specifically, I would like to speak about soil usage. And this is very relevant if we want to differentiate corn originated in the United States versus corn originated in other areas. And this is specifically related due to what we have in the United States with regards to not producing in wetlands, protected areas, and so on, with regards to protecting the soil. And again, this is included in the U.S. regulations, and these regulations are complemented with programs implemented locally by producers, supported by this association infrastructure that exists in the private sector in alliance with the public, in alliance with the private sector. So in the protocol you can see the description of all these practices that we have considered and that enable us to talk about sustainable corn. To conclude, I would like to make reference to what our SCE web platform is going to be. This is going to help with the implementation of the CSAP, and it is going to allow corn producers to accompany their shipments with sustainability certificates for the different volumes that they export. This way they can comply with sustainable production requirements that different, say, supermarkets in Germany might have with regards to the ingredients of their different products. So the platform is going to have a global allocation with regards to the different volumes of corn that is produced sustainably in the United States. And this is in the platform, exporters are going to register, and exporters are going to receive a proportion of those values for export. And with these certificates, they're going to transfer those certificates to be able to have traceability of the volumes that comply with the criteria that is defined in CSAP. Exporters abroad can sub-allocate different volumes depending on the processing of their different products, and somehow they will be able to be more flexible and more granular with regards to those sustainability records. So inside this framework of compliance that I have mentioned, goes from a very general level with regards to the adoption of best practices by producers, and is strengthened by the institutionality of laws and regulations of the United States that want or that include the volumes that are indeed certified for soil use, biodiversity, and soil health, and this is implemented through the USDA, and it also includes the commitments assumed by corn producers when they specifically indicate that in their corn production they do not affect areas that have high levels of erosion or wetlands. Again, neither of those are affected. So again, this is the core of the definition of those volumes. And my apologies for going into the wrong slide. But going back to what I was talking about, again, with regards to this narrative, real life narrative that I started my presentation with. Our intention is that, again, once someone asks the question, how sustainable is your product? Well, you will have the elements so you can have a better conversation, a more concrete conversation, trying to go beyond what we usually mean by sustainability, trying to provide additional content, and trying to be more accurate with regards to what we're speaking about. And the mission of the Council is basically developing markets and enabling trade. So through this tool, we can work with you to deal with those challenges. And when you face those challenges, we can help you dimension your sustainability in your supply chain. Perhaps you might want to concentrate on greenhouse effect gases, deforestation, or soil health, because as we know in the US, sustainability in the United States is quite important, and in corn production specifically, we're just beginning to have this conversation. So yes, we want to work hand in hand with you, we want to support our partners, and we are quite thankful for you being here and for you taking advantage of this opportunity. And with this, thank you.
Carlos, gracias. Vamos a tener
Thank you so much. We have a few minutes for a few questions before we break for a snack. Somebody's raising their hand. Those of you who are online, you can ask questions through the question and answer box or chat. The question is with regards to the data that you presented with regards to the contribution of live stock production. I think those figures that you presented are quite high. There's a data that indicates that agriculture for the United States is 10%. 10% contribution to the greenhouse effect gases, and livestock as a whole in the United States contributes somewhere between 2 and 3% to the greenhouse effect gases. Another thing that I would like to mention is that greenhouse effect gases can be split into CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, and the polluting power of nitrous oxide is 300 plus times more powerful than methane. Another discussion is with regards to carbon. Where does the carbon come from? Microbial activity of rumen, or does it really come from industry? Again, these are different cycles. Hydrocarbons remain in the atmosphere for 1,000 years, while the biological natural cycle of enteric fermentation collaborates to having better soils, and it only lasts for 10 years. Well, thanks for the question. Thanks for the comment. I'm going to try to respond as follows. The source of emissions of these figures is FAO, the United Nations, in other words, and perhaps the different figures relate to the graph that I presented toward my left earlier, because again it depends on what you include inside agriculture. Sometimes we include energy uses inside agriculture, sometimes it is not included, so we might have different situations. But the main point that I would like to emphasize is that yes, indeed, it is a topic that is concerning for those decision makers and for policy makers. And my role, and I do not work for the United Nations, again, our role is to try to respond and help you respond to what those policy makers might be proposing. If figures are lower, great, you can respond with a conversation that presents additional figures that might help you give specific information. But again, these environmental aspects are being presented by policymakers, and these policymakers are requiring actions from producers and so on, and they would like to reduce that. Is there a last question? There's a person towards the back that would like to ask a question. Again, we have time for one more question. Camilo? I believe that this depends on our perspective. This depends on how we interpret the situation as well. On our side, we would say yes, obviously, our production, our industry does not pollute as much as other industries do. But my main concern, and this is something that we frequently see when we speak about imports and exports, is that yes, we definitely do contribute to a large extent due to transportation. This is where our largest contribution to pollution comes from. What does transportation do? Well, basically, we're burning fossil fuels, and we are including, we are including vehicles as well as vessels. Again, vehicles on land, vessels on water. If we remove that transportation part, then our contamination is not as high. So I think that we also have to focus or see how we can present our industry with or without transportation effects. Do we have time for another question? Another comment? And I'm sure that he's going to disagree with what I just said. Well, the thing is, what are we really measuring? Emissions or carbon footprint? We have to focus on that, and we cannot shoot ourselves on the foot. No, we can't. Again, this discussion should begin with an FAO book that was presented in 2013, then 2016, and then Mindblower basically decredited all that was presented in that book. I think that we need to be more responsible with this topic. I completely agree with you, and as I mentioned before, greenhouse effect gases is only one of the dimensions that I mentioned, and as mentioned by the other person, we're speaking about a complex system. We're speaking about a complex conversation. So your beef is not with me, is against the FAO, but I completely share your frustration. And I think that we have to work together to face the challenges presented by the conversation. Thank you, Carlos. I'm sure you guys have many comments. Carlos is going to be with us tonight, so please, we can continue this conversation tonight during dinner. And again, Carlos, thank you very much for your presentation.
Bueno, las personas
Those that were connected online, we would like to thank you for your participation. And before you leave our Zoom session, please complete your survey, satisfaction survey. Those of you who are with us today in the hotel, we're going to break for a short snack until 5 p.m. So we're going to have a brief break until 5 p.m. This way we will be able to finish on time, and you will have a bit of time from the time we finish today's activities and the reception that we're going to be having tonight. And again, with this, thank you very much, and thank you to the Zoom participants.